Hi, Andre. How are you?
Well, thank you, sir.
Good. It's wonderful to talk to you again and pick up on our very interesting conversations about the use of animal models for human diseases, which carries on being a great problem, I think, for the scientific world, and certainly a great problem for certainly members of parliament and laymen to understand the the really in-depth, significant problems with using animals as models, and how many, for want of a better word, smoke screens kind of hide the failure. If I could just pick up on one thing, because so often when I read material that you send me or other material, it seems to me like the get out of jail card is we support the 3Rs policy that was initiated, I think you told me, in 1959. So now it's some 75 years out of date. Can you just touch on the 3Rs again and just revisit why it is a failed policy and not a policy that is achieving what it intended?
Certainly, as you say, Peter, it is a smoke screen.
Mhm.
So the 3Rs policy was promoted in 1959. So clearly, it is now out of date with current science.
Mhm.
So the 3Rs refers to reduction, in other words, trying to use fewer animals in experiments, refinement, trying to cause less suffering to the animals, and replacement, trying to replace animals wherever possible with, for example, human-based research methods. Now, that certainly made a lot of sense in 1959. Today, it is no longer fit for purpose.
Mhm.
And the only people who benefit from the 3Rs are either people who make a profit from animals, people who make a living out of animal experiments, so animal researchers, and groups of people who do not have a sufficient in-depth understanding of what current 21st century technology is capable of in terms of replacing animal testing. So um, that's the reason the 3Rs is still being peddled. And I would say today that the 3Rs is even being overshadowed by another official narrative, which is again a smokescreen, and that is the term phasing out of animal experiments,
Yeah.
let's say over the next 10 years. So once again, the only people who stand to benefit from this 10-year phasing out of animal experiments are either people with a vested interest, people who make a living or a profit from animal experiments, or individuals or groups who do not have sufficient scientific background to appreciate that the human-based test methods available now completely outclass animal tests.
Absolutely. Well, this is, of course, fascinating. Um, have the 3Rs contributed anything towards the ending of animal testing?
So as a scientist, I can never say it's contributed nothing. I cannot say that
Okay.
because it might have contributed something fortuitously.
Hmm.
But I mean, looking at the figures, the number of animal experiments is barely going down.
Yeah.
If they do go down, it's for the wrong reasons. It's, for example, animals are being reused in experiments, especially non-human primates today,
Yeah.
because non-human primates are becoming more and more scarce um, and more expensive.
Yeah.
Researchers and laboratories tend to reuse them. And then instead of repaying them by giving them a retirement home afterwards, they normally kill them, whereas they could have actually rehomed them.
Yes. Appalling. So if they are reusing them, are they reusing them for a different drug or for the same drug?
Probably would be for a different drug, but it depends on the drug. Because if, for example, if we're talking a vaccine, then the vaccine might have impacted on the immune system of the primate, and so you couldn't reuse that animal again because perhaps its immune system is not in prime shape anymore.
And so I think you may have mentioned before that it costs in the region of £50,000 or dollars to develop a primate for testing to be used as a model. Is that correct?
To purchase, yeah, it used to be, you know, in the region of £3,000 to £5,000.
Yeah.
I think it's gone up maybe 5 times that now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's just shocking, and all of that money could be put to much better purpose. So it hasn't reduced, it hasn't replaced, has it refined, or is that the other R?
Yeah,
Stopping.
refined is again, it's a smokescreen.
Yeah.
All it means is that the researcher will perhaps give some painkillers to the animal, but very often in the experiment, giving the painkiller would interfere with the outcome of the experiment. So, for example, if we are talking about a toxicity test to see when does a product become dangerous, at what dose, you wouldn't be able to give a painkiller because that would almost certainly interfere with your experiment.
Shocking. And also, on top of all of this, has been accepted by scientists throughout the world in the pharmaceutical industry. The use of animals has a 92 to 96% failure rate. And it's the only industry in the world that has such a high failure rate that's still carrying on, which is absolutely extraordinary. And also, I mean, referring back to our last conversation when the Food and Drug Administration in America had introduced very positive thoughts about ending animal testing. And I read those papers and I think, this is wonderful, it's going to happen. And then we get into the very important element that you have just mentioned, which is this phase out syndrome. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Yes, so that is the latest official narrative. And unfortunately, a lot of groups and a lot of individuals have fallen for it simply because they do not have a sufficient in-depth understanding or grasp of the availability of 21st century technology, such as human organs on chips. Now, human organs on chips are a game changer.
Yeah.
And the star of the show, if you like, is the human liver on a chip. And there was a publication that came out in 2022, so 3 years ago, which clearly showed that the human liver on a chip could detect adverse drug reactions that the animal tests were simply missing. So to all intents and purposes, we have now wasted 3 years because the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, are still not enforcing the use of human liver on a chip as routine testing. We're not even saying replace the animal testing. All we're saying is that 3 years ago, they could have put it side by side with the animal tests, with the routine animal tests, and compared the results, which might have been very embarrassing for the pharmaceutical industry and for the MHRA, but this is no excuse.
What kind of power does the MHRA have over the whole world of animal testing? What can it do to change it?
They could certainly advise the government, and they could certainly advise the pharmaceutical industry to include the human liver on a chip and other organs on chips as part of the routine preclinical testing. In other words, before testing a drug on healthy human volunteers and patients in clinical trials, they should, alongside the animal test, and ideally to replace the animal test, but let's already begin with simply using them alongside the animal tests to show up just how unpredictable the animal tests are.
Yeah. So, and the MHRA also accept the common knowledge that animal models have a 92% failure rate as well. That they know about all that as well, of course.
They certainly do know about it. They might not admit it in public, but they certainly do know about it.
So this is another thing I just can't get my head around. Why any organization or any laboratory would waste their time using a model that has a 92% failure rate when they have the opportunity, and you're saying that organ on a chip has 100% or 99% success rate. Is that right?
Very close to it's about 90%.
90%.
87% success rate.
So, I mean, it's not rocket science to actually choose which model you're going to use. I can't understand why they don't choose the positive model.
I think it comes down to a political will, Peter. Let's take the reverse situation. If the government really wanted to see animal replaced today, not in 10 years' time, but today, they could oblige the pharmaceutical industry to replace or at least use a human liver on a chip next to the animal test. And once we see the obvious result, then the animal test will automatically fall away. But I want to illustrate, when I talk about political will, let's take a reverse situation and let's talk about the authorization of the COVID vaccine in 2020. Now, normally it takes about 10 years to develop a safe and effective vaccine. It takes another 10 years for that vaccine to be on the market before it is authorized to pregnant women.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the case of the COVID vaccine, market authorization was given in 10 months. Instead of 10 years, it was done in 10 months, and it was available to everybody. In other words, it was okay to give to pregnant women.
Mm-hmm.
So it broke all the rules. But what I'm trying to illustrate is the fact that when the political will is there, something that normally takes 10 to 20 years can be done in 10 months. So why can't we do this with human liver on a chip?
Absolutely. And but for me, I keep falling back on the simple fact that animal testing is such a failure. I don't understand why the MHRA doesn't just promote everything other than using animal models. We have already discussed the fact that clearly there are many companies making lots and lots of money out of using animals. So is that basically the thing that drives it? It's money, not science.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. And I just want to give you one example where there are some cracks starting to appear in the armor.
Mm-hmm.
A recent publication authored by the former head of translational sciences at Bayer Pharmaceuticals in Germany. Now, for those who don't understand what translational sciences means, it's basically trying to apply the results obtained in animals to humans.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the former head. So really somebody very, very important at Bayer Pharmaceuticals. And I quote what he says in this article. He says that non-animal methods, and he refers specifically to human organs on chips. He says non-animal methods can offer immediate gains in safety prediction. So the key word here is immediate, which is what we've been saying for months and months. And so there is no excuse for the MHRA to stall and to sit on the fence while patients are actually being injured by drugs where they needn't be. And also in the case of liver injury, sometimes these adverse drug reactions can require a liver transplant in a person. Yeah. And that's going to cost the NHS £120,000 a pop.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it makes such good sense, doesn't it, Andre? And also the supporting of modern science as well. And I do find it impossible. If I were a scientist, maybe you say, well, that's just simplistic thinking. If I were a scientist, I would be asking myself and everyone else, what are we still doing testing on animals? I mean, it is mind-boggling that with such a sizable accepted failure rate, that it's still going on in any way whatsoever.
Well, the people in industry are completely aware of this. They are completely aware of this. And I think that just shows that they have no shame. In other
Yeah.
words, that they continue to support the system, knowing full well that it's causing animals to be tested on, to be killed for absolutely no reason, misleading science, and then stalling as much as possible to avoid having to use 21st century technology, which is far more predictive than animal testing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what can we do, Andre, to get this message more out there? I mean, what can we do to share this? How do we get it in? I mean, clearly we need to speak to people in government that are willing to listen and not be sidetracked by either the 3 R's or understanding animal research, which are the two bodies they seem to fall back on in terms of supporting a phase out, which, as we've agreed, is really just allowing those people who make money out of animal models to make more money. And as you said in our last talk, if it's a 10-year phase out, in 9 years' time, they'll say we need another 10 years and then another 10 years, and it'll go on, way past our lifetimes. So is there a model we can use in terms of driving this information forward that we can implement in some way by knocking on the doors of MPs in the House? How would you suggest we proceed?
Well, communication is the name of the game. So the problem today is not a shortage of technology.
Mhm.
The challenge today is how do we communicate a fairly complex message
Mhm.
to politicians, to the general public, and to shareholders, of course.
Yeah.
Shareholders.
So are shareholders the most important recipients, do you think?
I beg your pardon?
Are shareholders the most important recipients?
I would say so, because we have examples in the past when shareholders were made aware that animal tests could be replaced with non-animal methods. They thought it was a no-brainer. They adopted it straight away. And I'm talking about replacing mice experiments. So
Yeah.
you can imagine, Peter, if we're talking about replacing dogs or rabbits or monkeys,
Mhm.
shareholders would grab this opportunity with both hands. So
Yeah.
they have a huge role to play, but the problem is that it's very difficult to get hold of shareholders' email addresses.
Indeed, absolutely. Well, we'll just have to knock at the doors of government to begin with, and hopefully, I know it's, politicians are always so busy, so they fall back on the status quo, don't they? And they accept the fact that certainly if you have a title like Understanding Animal Research, it feels rather cuddly, that, doesn't it? It feels rather not like we are actually helping rather than promoting the cruelty. And so I'll have to speak to a few MPs and see what we can do.
Please.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you again, Andre, for sharing your fabulous knowledge about this. Was there anything else that you wanted to bring into the conversation before our next one, which I hope we'll have in about a month's time?
And I think we brought up the main points, Peter.
Right. Marvelous. Well, thank you again. I can't wait to share this, Andre. You're great. Thanks very much.